Welcome everybody here to our newest edition of our FinDepth Hangout sessions. I am Pablo Knowles, and I'm here with Oscar Hazel and Ian Wharton, and we'll be talking several things Miami Dolphins today at the quarter point. As everybody knows, Dolphins have had kind of an up and down start to the year, some really good, some really bad, and a lot of in between. And should be fun. We'll be talking about some positional needs. We'll be talking about the recent Raiders game, and we'll be talking about what we'll be looking for in the team moving forwards as the season starts to move along here. Oscar, you wanna get started with kind of where any one of those things that strikes your fancy in terms of what you think we should get started here with?
I guess we can start with the Oakland game. It was my first time to see the Dolphins live, so that was quite interesting to kind of see what they look like from film to person. And I guess it was interesting to kind of see. We saw kind of the whole repertoire of read option, which kind of was interesting to me. Because early on we saw, I think it was the first play from scrimmage was zone read, and the perimeter defender crashes, and then Tannehill was reading the slot corner, who is then he was reading Tannehill, and then we saw the shuttle pass to make that. So you had two wide receivers on one DB and a boundary. So, and I think throughout it, that was one of the things I was focusing on watching all 22 is kind of, because Laser had spoken about in a press conference, there'll be times when the defense is deciding whether Tannehill runs, and there's sometimes when the defense thinks they're deciding whether Tannehill runs or not, but there's no option. And then there's sometimes where there's options of the option. So I think we saw kind of all of those things. There was times when Tannehill was reading no one and handed off the ball. So if he was meant to take it, there was no one who was reading. So that would be an incorrect read if he was reading space. And then there was times when he was reading defensive backs. Sometimes he was reading defensive linemen, sometimes linebackers. So we kind of saw that whole package of the zone read, and we saw why it's so effective taking that defender out of the box. Most of the big games in the running game were off zone read, and you have that, you're taking one defender has to account for Tannehill, or is being slowed down to the ball carrier in the backside pursuit by Tannehill handing off the ball, and they're kind of having to account for him, and then also Tannehill was running. So I think that was kind of like the thing that I was happy to see be more prominent in the offense. We saw that quite a bit in week one, even though Tannehill wasn't actually holding onto the ball and running. And that was partly because Oakland were crashing a bit and they're a bit slow. There was even times runs, there's a Daniel Thomas run where there was a linebacker, or someone was on Deion Sims, who was cutting along the back of the line to pick up the perimeter defender that Tannehill was reading, and he ran straight past Daniel Thomas in the hole whilst he was running down. So that's how kind of like bad Oakland were at kind of defending those things. But that's kind of like the one thing I liked from the offense, and it was good to see kind of start off quickly, even if the first drive wasn't that good. I don't know if Ian, if there was any kind of takeaways you had from like this. I don't know, it just feels like a weird kind of game to talk about now. It doesn't really feel real. I don't know why. But I don't know if Ian, what your hot takes are.
Yeah, it was definitely an impressive game. When you look at kind of what they were able to accomplish, how easily they made it seem, how easy it looked, and just the execution, the increased focus by Tannehill, the quicker decision making. I mean, he looked so much more confident, and almost to a point where he looked pissed off, like he was trying to prove everybody, every little negative thing that had come up during the season. I feel like he executed at a high level this game. Whether it be scrambling out of the pocket, whether it be making tight throws, anticipating receivers, he literally did it all. One bad missed throw to Hartline on that first drive, made the right read, just overthrew it too high. It was really an impressive showing from him, but I thought what really stood out to me was I thought Lazer's spacing with his routes were a lot better, much more improved, more vertical. We saw Charles Clay get a little bit more involved on a couple of intermediate throws, and I thought that was mostly caused by the outside receivers running deeper, more vertically, without intention of going to them, but with more intention of clearing out the middle of the field, which later opened up a play-action pass over the middle. I think it was to Landry, might have been to Gibson.
No, it's to Landry.
But
The one where Woodson
was it Landry?
Yeah.
Yeah, yep, that's right. So they hit a couple of plays over the middle that I thought were mostly due from having the open field in the middle, which is partially because the linebacker situation for Oakland is really poor. They were missing their already average starters. I think C.O. Moore was out. C.O. Moore's pretty good, but Miles Burris or whatever his name is pretty terrible, and the fact that they had his backup out there is saying something. So it was a lot of different things that kind of added up and worked together. But I think from Miami's perspective, I thought that the play calling was much better, much more balanced. We've now seen 2 games where they've blown out the opponent without, especially the New England game, they didn't execute especially well. They still moved the ball up and down the field on them with ease. And you see the winning formula. They're going to have to run the ball 35 to 40 times a game, and they're going to have to pass the ball 30 to 35 times a game. That's really their sweet spot. Lamar Miller has been extremely impressive with what he's brought to the table, and part of that scheme. Part of that is the zone blocking scheme. It's meant to make everybody around, in that system better. But I think he's proved a lot of people, maybe not wrong, but he's mitigated the concerns about his vision, I think, this season. And maybe it's improved, maybe it's scheme. I mean, it's really kind of impossible to tell because the offensive line play was so bad last year. But overall, just the offense, just much more consistent, much more aggressive in terms of attacking the weaknesses of Oakland. And I thought that the way they were balanced with their play calling. Those are 3 things that you really want to see on a weekly basis out of Laser, and I thought he did well in week 4 to attack.
We saw lots of passes to the flats as well, which is kind of supplements the run game. I think kind of the running 40 times is slightly. I think there was 16 runs at the end of the game to burn off clock when Matt Moore was in, so that kind of changes the quota a lot. But I think if you watched that first half, it wasn't very run heavy, but there were passes to the outside to supplement the run. So then, to me, that's working in the same vein. You're not putting pressure on the offensive line or Tannehill to sit back there and always have to. He can do that, but you want to slow down the pass rush with play action and pass to the flat screens. We haven't really seen a huge amount of screens to the running backs. They've been predominantly to wide receivers or tight ends. But that's quick throw, and Tannehill was very accurate with them. Even if the first quarter, some of the blocking downfield wasn't that great by wide receivers or tight ends. But I think that's part of what the balance we need to be. It's not always about the ball flying 20 yards down the air to get big gains. It's about stretching the defense in every way. So I think that was kind of more promising for me as well, and that kind of execution by everyone, even or when someone. It was really nice to see Wallace playing physical as well. I think that's been a really surprising aspect, and maybe that's because he's been given more trust by Laser. There's been a lot to talk about. He's lining up in different places, which he didn't do last year. He hasn't done it his whole career. It's not isolated to 1 year, and that's partly due to his skill set, and then maybe he's not had the opportunity as well to show it. So I think maybe having more on his plate and having this astronomical cap figure to kind of live up to, maybe those two kind of things subsiding at one time, and maybe working as a good motivational tool. Pablo, did you have anything particular that you wanted to bring up from the game?
Yeah, to echo a few of the things you guys have mentioned, I was I was impressed with just the general energy of the offense. I felt like everybody's talking about Tannehill, and I think Tannehill's play was very apparent in terms of why he was so sharp. He was making good, quick reads. He was decisive. He was good on his feet. He was good when they moved him around a little bit as well. But the thing that stuck out for me the most right off the bat was the wide receiver play. And I can't say the obvious would be Mike Wallace really fighting his way into the end zone. But it wasn't just that. I mean, it was even Brian Hartline after he caught that pass in the seam, which was just a beautiful, beautiful pass by Tannehill down the right side, getting those yards after the catch. And it was just the general energy with which the offense played with. And it almost made me wonder if, and I tweeted a bit about this yesterday, but it almost made me wonder if maybe Bill Lazor has been misusing, or maybe vice versa, the public, including us, has been misinterpreting what he means by tempo. I think most of us assume tempo, which we've heard probably 1.5 billion times since the preseason. Most of us think about that as how quickly we go from the end of the play to the next snap, or from snap to snap. And traditionally we think of faster tempo, for example, with Chip Kelly offenses being a lot of no huddle. But I almost wonder if he, in this case, if it means more of just the general pace and energy in the intra-play, within the play itself, the speed with which the team plays. Because it looked like a much faster team. Now, the snap count was 74, which isn't, astronomically higher than other games. But the general tempo, the general pace of play seemed much faster and much more aggressive, as Ian mentioned.
Well, in the off-season, when Lazor ever mentioned tempo, he did caveat it with saying, when we talk about tempo, what we predominantly mean is from the break of the huddle to the snap of the ball. So he always referred to a huddle. So I do think they are talking about something different in means to tempo. And after the first game, when people are asking, or maybe in the second game, why has there been no up-tempo, and kind of these things, and Lazor would bring up how he wanted them to be quicker on their motions, and perhaps that was a reason why we kind of went away from seeing as much motion in the offense, because they weren't doing it quick enough, and we did see the clock kind of going down to the end. So I do think the general populace's idea of tempo is different to what Lazor's envision of it is. I didn't really notice them from being there, but maybe that it didn't really feel like it was enormously high-tempoed offense. It did, and so but maybe that's just because there's huge gaps between adverts. I don't know, but yeah, I do think kind of you're right in saying that their idea of tempo is different, and perhaps they were running half a second quicker on their motions, or getting out of the huddle to the snap of the ball was quicker. So that and maybe having that kind of being already down behind, and we've seen this last year. This team kind of played well in adversity and when they weren't favoured to win, and this was kind of a position where then kind of playing a bad team and there was only 3-point line or something, so there was kind of like even though they were favoured, you should be favoured more against an Oakland team.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting questions is, besides the opponent, which I think is an important thing to keep in mind here, and it's a reason to not get too high here, right? But besides the opponent, it's interesting to think about why the execution was so much better than in the prior two games, at least. The prior games had a couple very key dropped passes and situations where they just completely killed the drive and got us to 3rd and long. I haven't gone back and looked at our 3rd down yardage in this game, but I noticed many times during the game that because we were effective on 1st and 2nd down, we had a lot of 3rd and short where you have your whole playbook open, right? I mean, you can run a little short thing to get a 1st down, but you can also be dangerous on play action or go deeper down the field as well. And it's curious to me from an execution standpoint and also from a game planning and play calling standpoint as to why the team was so much better at executing. And I don't want to totally discount the effort/focus factor. Tannehill, he played well, but he's thrown good passes in prior games that were dropped that hit guys in the hands. And in this game, the receivers still had a couple of drops, but they weren't they weren't even close to as bad in terms of bad drop passes against Oakland. So I don't have a good explanation as to why the wide receivers would be catching catchable passes at a better rate than in prior games, aside from just concentration. And, I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that.
You came up with an interesting point. The drops before were kind of in the situation of the drop made them more significant. And I think with you, Ian kind of cited that Tannehill, the Heartline throw that was, that Heartline wasn't able to drag in. I know Dustin's talked about how it was a 10, that Heartline made his break at 10-yard drop, at 10 yards, which is pretty unusual. Generally it's 12 for that kind of route. And I was right behind that throwing lane, and it did look like something was wrong it didn't look right to my eyes. But even that ended a drive, but they still got 3 points from it. And so maybe that's kind of like when things didn't go right in this game, they didn't go terrible. Whereas in kind of previous games, we saw the drop passes happen in points in the game in which they swung momentum or feel so maybe because there were still 3 drops in this game, I'm pretty sure, having charted it, and I think every other game was 4, so it does also come down to kind of when the drops happen and how that affects the momentum of the game.
Yeah, I agree. And the Gibson drop was pretty bad in this game. And you're right, though. It seems like the timing of the drops is really what makes things really interesting to see, because in the last few games where they lost, it seemed like a drop would happen on like 3rd down, hit Gibson, whoever, right in the hands, you drop it, and then the Dolphins would punt, and they'd punt from like their own 38, 40-yard line, for example. Ensuing punt, big punt return to, let's say like the Bills 40, and then it's a short field for the defense. So NFL is a little bit about luck. Football is about luck. Some people don't want to admit that sometimes, but that's just kind of what happens. The situational football, just everything worked out so much better. Like you said, when you have an incompletion on 3rd down, but you can turn it into 3 points, well, all of a sudden that drop or that missed throw all of a sudden isn't really a big deal in comparison to ball on the 50, 4th and 3rd and 5. You drop a 6-yard 1st down, and then they go down and they score, with the ensuing possession because you had to punt. It makes it look a lot worse. And in reality, it is a little bit. It probably is a little bit worse, but you have to separate those two things sometimes.
I was wondering what you guys thought about. I don't know if we necessarily ran more read option, but Tannehill certainly had a couple nice runs, and I wondered how much of his sharpness and how much of his sort of more sort of effective, quick decision making was a factor of him just getting that heart rate up and him sort of getting into the game through those runs. I don't know if we can prove that one way or the other, but I just felt like his energy overall was a lot better, but I thought in a way moving him around the pocket and getting him running a bit, sort of almost like a horse before a race, just got him sweating, got him going, got him in that right mindset to react faster even when he was in the pocket.
Well, we definitely we saw him run more, but that was more due to what the Oakland contained defenders were doing. They were crashing onto the running back after those reads were the defender reading Tannehill wasn't crashing, and there was big gains, so they countered that by crashing that defender, and then Tannehill ran. We probably did it from my kind of rough charting. Times in which I actually saw them reading a defender was pretty similar to week 1, and it was a bit less the 2 weeks in between. And we didn't see Tannehill run against the Patriots because they had that perimeter defender play contain. And this would be an interesting thing. If I was the Patriots, I would crash that end player, so you let Tannehill run, and because I would want my divisional team to have their quarterback being getting hit in open field. Personally, although you are Laser's done a nice thing where he has set up, if there is, say, that defensive back peeking in to be really containing the quarterback, you don't have that pass to the side. So that's quite a nice way of negating a quick, like, loss of yards hit in open field. Although we did see that on that 4th and 1 where we didn't have that option in that play. So that's kind of why Tannehill was running. Whether it gets his heart rate up, more running, and I'm not as sure about that, because I mean throwing a nice pass should do the same. Really, it's all adrenaline. I think it's getting into the rhythm and of the whole offense moving. That in itself is more beneficial, and we move the ball relatively easily early on. And so that kind of, once you're executing well quickly as a unit, that also gives kind of the offensive coordinators going to be more likely to play more plays that maybe are kind of like a bit harder because he has trust in you to execute them and call more things. So I'm not sure if Tannehill running is good, but getting a 9-yard gain is the way I would say it. I don't know if Ian, you have any thoughts before we get to kind of looking ahead and players that are returning after, or potentially returning after the bye week, as I think we just lost Pablo.
No, I think we covered it pretty good.
Okay. So do you want to go into anything on the defensive side?
Oh, on defense? I mean, the ball snowballed so quickly against Oakland that, I mean, I don't really think they had really much of a chance. The way that they run their offense, it makes Derek Carr look better than what I think where he's at developmentally. And I say that as someone that I did like Derek Carr coming out. I had a high second-round grade on him. I did like him. And I think he's done fine. I don't think he's done anything so far for them to be worried about. As far as Miami, they just really played into Miami's scheme. I mean, they played a little bit tighter on the corners throughout the game, which limited those quick-hitting 7-yard gains, which frustrates all of us, especially on like first or second down. I mean, they're in second and third and 3, third and 3 situations before you can blink your eyes. They kind of limited that a little bit more. Part of that is probably Oakland's game, more of Oakland's offense than I think it was Coyle's realizing that, you know, what Miami does ends up hurting them more than it helps them. The reason why I say that is because we've seen now for a season, over more than one season, that he's not going to adjust keeping his guys in off-man coverage. It's just what he likes to do. So, I kind of just thought Miami just outmatched them. I mean, it was really just talent-wise. Miami just way more talented. They feasted off of Carr and McGloin. because both of them being young quarterbacks, it's normal for them to stare down targets. And Oakland just has a bunch of number 2 and number 3 receivers, so couldn't really hurt Miami that way either. It was a good performance, but it was more of we're just more talented than you type of thing. And then the scheme was a little bit better. Jelani Jenkins played pretty well again. Philip Wheeler surprisingly played well. He's been much better at the strong side. I charted his snap count, kind of splitting time between weak side and strong side, but he is playing more of a majority on the strong side, and he's definitely playing a lot better there than he was last year at weak side.
And I think he ended up playing probably the most snaps on the defensive side the whole game, and I think it was kind of towards the end of the game where he went to play a bit more weak side when it was kind of in the bag, and it was quite nice to kind of get a look at more of the youngsters, kind of the rookies and the second-year players in the second half. Jamar looked really good. He made some pretty good plays, and so that was nice to see. Whereas kind of Davis is kind of the same, kind of makes flashy plays and then also gets beaten deep. And gets lost in some of his backs turns. I just don't think that's going to be something you can really. Or I think I've seen kind of flashes of him being okay with his back turns, but as soon as you see that, then he messes up again. But it was nice to see. We saw Tripp, McCain a tiny bit, I think. Oh no, we didn't see McCain. He didn't go. Today, Anthony Johnson played quite a bit, and then DeAndre Coleman, the new addition. So I think that's quite nice. Oh, Walt Aikens even got a pick in his last couple of snaps, so that was quite nice to, particularly for kind of me and Ian, who we watch quite a lot of these like kids coming in. So it's nice to get kind of a spot check of where they are developmental wise. So I don't know if there was anyone that stood out to you out of the first and second year players, other than Jelani, you've already brought up.
I was just really happy to see Walt. He got a pick, and I was super excited about that. That made my night. Whenever that happened, I was like, all right, it's a great day. I'm just going to celebrate this. Was he playing cornerback or safety on that play? Because I didn't.
Safety.
Safety? Okay, I was hoping it'd be corner so I could laugh at Omar Kelly for saying he can't play corner.
I think he wasn't man, though. I think it was like safety, but man cover. I don't know.
Good. That's a victory then.
Yeah.
I'll take that. But no, I mean, yeah, it was good to see. I didn't really study it too much, just kind of enjoyed it. Even on second look, I didn't really look too much in deep, just because I don't really expect to see them a whole lot this year. But it was good to see them hold their own for most of the game. And like you said on Davis just he'll make those plays where it's like, oh, sweet, like he could be, a future big time contributor to this team, and then he just, like on that touchdown that he blew the coverage on, you're just like what are you doing? You're up by that much. Don't sit on the route. Just defend the end zone.
That's the nice thing of seeing game in live. Pretty much, or maybe not the nice thing. Pretty much as soon as I saw that route develop, I was like, oh damn, touchdown. Like,
yeah.
If I was, and we saw him targeted a lot, and I think if we didn't have Rashad Jones coming back, if I was game playing this team, I'd be throwing towards Davis a lot. As kind of overall thumb. That's my first read. Is Davis.
This is jumping the gun a little bit into a later discussion that we were going to have, but thinking about future needs on this team, it's way too early in the season to really give up on anybody at all, especially the young players. But you have to start wondering about these young cornerbacks at some point. Obviously Jamar Taylor was very hurt last year for much of the year. Will Davis didn't play a whole lot either. But they were both early-ish round picks. And really, you've got a cornerback in Finnegan who's played fine. I don't think he's been a standout, and I don't think he's been a huge liability either. and then you've got now Jimmy Wilson, who's going to be getting back into the corner slot there, and you just have to start to wonder: are these guys going to be starters on this team at some point, where you can rely on them and where they're going to make big plays, or are they just going to be sort of more role players and you kind of fit them in here and there?
Well, I think we can maybe talk about kind of what expectations of young players should be determined on position. And for me, corner is, along with quarterback, are the two positions where I'm prepared to sit a guy for a couple of years. So it's pretty rare for a corner to come into the league and play well. I mean, last year, as Desmond Trufant was playing like a All-Pro, and that's a very rare occasion. You see far more high picks play badly. Generally, that's because kind of high picks they're being picked high because of their athletic attributes over maybe skill, but it's also the level of competition is so much harder, and if you're a young player and you're no longer the best player on your team anymore, so they're getting targeted more, whereas in college you don't really see these players getting targeted 10 times a game because they're the best player on their team. So I don't know if Ian, you want to kind of chime in what you think. I do agree, at the end of the year, if neither of them have stepped up or have at least showed flashes. I quite like what I've seen from Jamar. The times he has played, he's looked, and bear in mind, before this game, we've pretty much seen him on Jimmy Graham and Gronk, the two examples of him playing, which maybe speaks volumes as well to what the coaching staff believe he can do, that he's been put in those positions. And so that's quite interesting why he's not actually playing the rest of the time, although it sounds like that he kind of earned having 50% of the snaps from Davis last game, so that could be an interesting thing to see if Finnegan or Jimmy Wilson kind of take a step back at all. But Ian, if you want to kind of talk about what you expect from rookie or like young corners.
Yeah, I mean you really hit it on the head there. We're seeing a rare rookie class right now for cornerbacks. The early round guys that have been taken, for the most part, have played pretty well. Justin Gilbert's been pretty bad for the Browns, and I mean,
as well.
What's that?
And that's what I was kind of referring to as like an athlete over in a corner.
Yeah, exactly. But outside of Gilbert, I haven't seen Darqueze Dennard either for Cincinnati. But outside of them, you look at the other corners that were drafted highly, and you see Kyle Fuller. He's been fantastic, obviously, in Chicago. Bradley Roby for Denver's been very good, and then Jason Verrett's been good when he's played. And then the kid for San Francisco, Jimmy Ward, he's been pretty good too, splitting time at mostly nickelback corner. Nice fit there as well. Yeah, absolutely.
We haven't really seen any other guys.
Yeah, it's been about it from what I've seen. Trying to look around the league, that's really what I've seen. Those are the main guys that have played. They played pretty well outside of Gilbert. And that's rare. That's not something that should be expected in most years. I think we'll see it again next year because next year's cornerback class is fantastic. If all the guys declare, that should. But it's not usually something that should be expected. And I think that what Miami's going through with Davis and Taylor is pretty standard. I agree with Oscar. I think that Taylor has been really as good as he can be with his snaps. There's a reason why we don't see a lot of passes thrown his direction. I think that there's a reason why he's not getting any opportunities to really intercept balls. And sometimes I think people confuse interception statistics with how good a corner is. If the ball's not being thrown his way, he's doing a good job. That's usually what's happening, or the quarterback's missing the target. But for Taylor, for the most part, he's been on his guy. He doesn't have the deepest speed. I think he's vulnerable at times on go routes. without safety help. But outside of that, short and intermediate routes, I think he's done pretty well. I think he's got. I've thought this, before they drafted him as well. I think he's got the ability to be a pretty good number 2 cornerback, maybe like a low end number 1. And there's nothing wrong with that, especially for a second round pick. Davis, on the other hand, Davis has been very hit or miss. He's been, up and down, risk reward type player, and I'm not sure. Obviously, it's not time to give up on him or anything like that. It's way too early to be doing that. You need to give these guys at least 3 or 4 years to kind of see where they've developed. Especially, he made a big talent jump too, going from Utah to Miami. So I would give him some more time. I think that when you look at the cornerback position in general, you've got 2 aging corners. I think Grimes is fine, but just because he's playing well now, that doesn't mean he will in a year or two. So, I'm fine with Finnegan. Finnegan's done a good job, especially compared to what the doomsday scenarios were when he signed here. He'll probably be here next year if the team does well. You could see a lot of this roster, turned over if things go south quickly, and he would be a guy that goes if the team, blows everything up, I think, and then your needs are automatically adjusted because of that. But I think the young guys have done well. That being said, like a future need, I think cornerback is always a need. I think you should always take a cornerback in every draft, just because you look at how the league is structured now. You've got to get good cornerbacks. So I think Miami will definitely be looking at cornerback here in this next draft. Maybe not highly, first round or 2, but I think at some point, depending on where they're drafting too, it could definitely be an area where they need to look at. Oscar, what do you think about potential other needs looking past this season?
Well, I think just I guess like the one thing as well, talking about Grimes, is if you look at his skill set and what makes him a good player, is that quick area burst speed, and that's something that can go quick in old players, and it goes quickly. And then what do you have left really is not a very desirable number 1 corner. And I think what kind of like you were saying, Pablo, is like the young players haven't given us a reason not to draft a corner. And then perhaps that's what fans are looking for, is to be like, oh, we don't need to worry about this position for the next 8 years, but you pretty much have to worry about every position every year. So I wouldn't say no to a corner, particularly if a player like, I know both myself and Ian are pretty high on Marcus Peters, so if a kind of a talent like that fell in the way in which Fuller fell to Chicago, they didn't need a starting corner, but they would do soon. And I kind of feel we're in that kind of similar position where we have 2 aging old pros, and any day could be their last day, and it's never bad to kind of get a player that you believe's good. And maybe this kind of goes into philosophy of you want to take the best player available, and if you can be in a position where you're taking the best player available, even if that on your depth chart isn't a starter, that's better than you're making a better roster. For me right now, looking at kind of what I would say are, I kind of try to put it into, when I'm looking at future position needs, is where I think the roster can be upgraded, and then also how I value that position within a draft. So I would say in the first round I'd be looking at a safety, wide receiver, or a corner in the next draft. Maybe a linebacker, depending on kind of the status of Wheeler and Jenkins and Tripp. Not a middle linebacker, I don't think there's going to be one there in the first, but maybe kind of a Shaq Thompson, maybe that kind of talent I think would be interesting. And then in the second day I'd be looking at any of those 3 positions, as well as middle linebacker, maybe running back. So that's kind of how I'm looking at. That also has variables at tight end if you're not re-signing Clay, a defensive tackle if you let Starks and Aldrich go. So there's obviously variables within all of these things, but if I was constructing if I was planning ahead, that's where I'd be planning, is tying up Baldrick, seeing how Clay plays, and maybe perhaps what his market value is, because I don't particularly want to pay him like over 8 million if he's producing the way he is at the moment. And that could be regards to teams scheming against him, and that's kind of stopped him producing, or whether the knee is an issue. But I think wide receiver, that we can turn over the wide receiver position pretty well, easily, and get more talent. Safety, I think free safety is a pretty big need. Whenever we're playing single high against Oakland, it was Jimmy Wilson being deep. So I guess that's something I haven't talked about, is Rashad coming back, and I think it's going to change the defense more than people think. I don't know whether we'll be playing any single high, I'm not sure, and whether we go back to the first couple of weeks we were mirroring our safeties, so it would be strong weak side determined on who is dropping deeper and who's coming up. We have that to a certain degree, but whenever it's single high, it's Wilson was playing as a free safety and Delmas was playing as a box safety. So whether that changes or not, Rashad, obviously, when he was first in Miami, played free safety quite a lot, or he played deep a lot, but that kind of limits his playmaking ability. So I think that's going to be kind of an interesting dynamic of how that kind of change, and I think his suspension and the bye week kind of working well and being able to kind of readjust defensively how you do that. I think if there's a free safety, whether it's I guess maybe we can talk about a couple of prospects. I guess there's like Collins is kind of the darling of the draftnik world at the moment, the safety out of Alabama. Then guys I kind of like a Darren Smith, Fresno. I think he's a pretty talented kid. I'm not really sure on Drummond, Michigan State. I'm not a huge fan, but I think he'll be up then, kind of like the first couple of days, and then that's kind of, I think Ian's probably looked at more safeties than I have. Underclassmen, I like Eskridge, the Syracuse safety. I can't remember, Eskridge or something. I can't remember how to say his name, but he's pretty interesting. He's really long, and the UCLA have this really long kid as well. I think his name's Jefferson. He's really athletic, and so it'll be interesting, kind of like what we see developing with the safety position, and that will kind of tailor, obviously, if this coaching staff still exists, what they're looking for the position, because obviously Chris Clemens wasn't what they were looking for, and Delmas perhaps is, but how do they that player alongside Rashad Jones? So I don't know if you want to go for any kind of safeties you like, or what you kind of envision that position looking like in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I just think it's. I wish the timing of the suspension, I guess, of who we play, is a little scary to be possibly going into mirror safeties again, or even a situation where you've got either Jones or Delmas up high against Green Bay after the bye week. That's kind of scary. But it'll be interesting to see, because conceivably, if they're going to do single high, they could bring Wilson back out on the field or move him from slot, put him up to safety, even use possibly 3 safeties on the play. Or it'll be interesting. I think it just opens up a lot more possibilities for what they're going to be able to do. I really don't know what to expect, because preseason we didn't have all 22 access for coaches film, so it's just going to be really interesting to see how they use that, especially against a team like Green Bay and then Chicago shortly after that. Teams that can really damage your secondary if you don't have your stuff together. So I'm somewhat excited. I'm like a nervous excited for it, I guess. As far as after the year, I actually took a look at Drummond today, 3 or 4 games, just the entire defense, because I do Big Ten for Optimum Scouting anyways, and I dropped him a little bit in my grade for what he's done. He's a free safety for Michigan State, and just a little bit more tentative than I think he was last year. Takes a little bit, somewhat poor angles on his pursuits. Play recognition is usually pretty good, but when he's in man-to-man coverage, he got burned deep. Once by Oregon, once by Wyoming, and stuff like that you can't have, period, by a free safety in the NFL, let alone in college. So Oregon's understandable. I don't really measure the Oregon game too much because of the way Oregon stretches the field and they make safeties look terrible routinely. So that is what it is. But against a team like Wyoming, you can't have that. So I think if the Dolphins, I haven't looked at Darren Smith yet either, from Fresno. I know you've been on that train since before the season, so I'll have to get on that for sure. But Landon Collins is clearly the best player at that position, in my opinion. I think he's going to be a top 5 pick. You just don't see safeties that come into the league with that type of experience, with that type of physicality, with that type of physical range. You don't see that coming into the NFL. I think he's a baby of kid Eric Berry, and then I forget Eric Weddle. So I think he's really like a good mixture of those two guys, and those are two of my favorite safeties in the league. So my love of Landon Collins is definitely for real.
And as you were saying kind of about Drummond being in man, we kind of saw Collins match up with Kevin White, which was really nice in man, and Collins win. And so I think that's going to be kind of like the totem pole or like this is what he is, like man against an NFL player, seeing and winning. So maybe
real quick, there is a guy tonight playing in the Houston UCF game that people should be checking out. Clayton Geathers for UCF wears number 26. If you're going to watch the game tonight, definitely watch out for him. Big hitter. He's more of the strong safety type, but he does have some experience playing single high. You prefer to keep him in the box, so he's more of like a Rashad Jones type. But if you like safety play, watch him. He's a huge hitter.
Going back for a second to players returning from injury and how it affects the upcoming games. We've talked a little bit about Rashad Jones, and we'll see, how that pans out with how they use Wilson and Delmas. But how do you guys feel about Misi coming back? In the preseason, obviously that was a bit of a surprise when we heard that Misi was going to be moved to the middle, considering he's never ever done that really. And you could kind of see his head spinning a little bit at the beginning when he started playing in the middle. And there was a couple articles written early in the preseason about how he actually went to the coaches and told them he didn't want to play in the middle. And let's say I have it on pretty good word that's actually was real, and that my understanding is that really actually happened, for what that's worth. And essentially they were like, no, you're going to play in the middle because that's where we need you and we think you can do it. I guess Jelani Jenkins has been obviously a really nice surprise in terms of how he's filled in during this time. Wheeler, the way they're using him now, I think has been a lot more rational, and we've seen him a lot more natural in the way he's reacting and his play speed. But I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts in terms of, how I think Trusnick has looked a step slow a couple times this season, and I'm wondering how you guys see Misi coming back, shaking up the play, and how we'll see, everyone panning out in the upcoming games.
Well, I don't think it was, looking back at it, I don't think we should have been as surprised about Misi at middle linebacker, considering all the undrafted free agents they brought in, like McCain, were edge players that they brought in to play linebacker, and even was it Daryl Johnson as well, was an edge player they wanted to play off-ball backer. So there was kind of signs that was going to happen. I'm not surprised Misi was upset. It's basically you're learning how to rewrite. You're basically learning how to write with your left hand. You're completely changing or learning how to read backwards or something like that. I think they are channeling plays more to the weak side linebacker, and I think that was built if Ellaby was there. So that's kind of like the way, and that's why we kind of see Jenkins having a lot of stops and tackles, is they're kind of, the defensive line are trying to push the play towards that, funnel it towards the weak side linebacker, which quite a lot of 4-3 teams are doing now, and that was kind of what we're seeing in Buffalo and a couple other places, and why they were quite keen for Kiko Alonso to play that weak side linebacker position. So I think the Mike linebacker roles are slightly reduced in the scheme we're seeing. There's been a couple of the times in which we're going to see kind of be the biggest problem is in coverage. In that when we're sitting in zone coverage and just kind of we've seen a couple of times Trusnick just get beaten by quarterback's eyes, that Gronk touchdown, for example. So I think maybe if Misi's more disciplined, sitting in zones, that could be promising. And he did look better as kind of the games went on, reading, but better from kind of terrible. So I don't know if Ian, you have any thoughts on that? On Misi's return?
Yeah, I think it'll just help in terms of depth. I think it'll help in terms of special teams. At the very worst, he is a little bit better athlete than Jason Trusnick. So I don't think we'll see worse play out of Misi than we did Trusnick. And Trusnick was okay. I mean, in fairness to him, in coverage he was pretty much a liability, but against the run he did as best as he could, and he was not much worse than Ellerby was last year. So, I mean, you know, Misi's going to be an athletic upgrade over him. The question is, can he diagnose the same? Can he get to running lanes, make the play near the line of scrimmage, or is he going to be making tackles 5 yards down the field? I don't think he's going to be much worse or any worse actually than Trusnick. So at the very least, the Dolphins are getting more depth back, and they desperately need depth for special teams. We've seen the special teams just look awful in previous weeks. So getting a guy like Trusnick being able to be healthy, fully rested for that's going to be a benefit to the team. Best case scenario is that the Dolphins have themselves an average to maybe good middle linebacker. That would be a major shakeup based off of what many people have projected as far as the Dolphins team needs for after the season. If they would enter, let's just say Misi plays well through the whole year, Wheeler continues to play well through the entire season. That would make things very, very interesting after the season, because it's obviously been a much maligned group, and rightfully so, entering the season. But I think that Jenkins and Wheeler playing well have really changed the game. We saw this last couple of weeks, we saw a couple mock drafts give outside linebackers to the Dolphins, and quite frankly, even if Misi is terrible at middle linebacker, he's a good strong side linebacker. And I think we can all agree that Jenkins seems to be a decent starting option, at least for the Dolphins, on the weak side. So that's one position I certainly wouldn't think that Miami needs to address, depending on cap casualties after the season.
Yeah, one thing I'll just jump in and say that I was kind of surprised about, and I've criticized Trusnick. I think it's been fairly apparent when he's been bad in coverage. I don't think it's been very subtle. But to be fair, against the run, he's been okay. You know, I was just looking at PFF's advanced stats, and in tackling efficiency, which comes mostly from the running game in his case, but in some cases in passing game, he's in the top 10 for number of tackles attempted per each missed tackle. So he's been actually very effective in his tackling game, and then also in his run stop percentage. If you look at the number of plays that they're in which they contribute to a run stop, he's actually sixth in the league with 10.6% run stop percentage, which was a little bit surprising to me. But I think there's a little bit of bias because we remember those like really ugly plays he makes every once in a while where he just is totally beat. The other two players that I kind of just wanted to mention while we're on interesting players is two guys. One, which I think the secret is slowly coming out in terms of him being a complete badass, and I think Oscar has mentioned it, which is Jared Odrick. Has been really impressive, and I'm just happy to see that he's starting to get the credit that he really deserves, because I think he's an incredibly valuable player to this team. And then the other player I think that's really interesting in maybe the opposite way has been Charles Clay. And I think a lot of us really expected to see Clay very involved in this offense. He had some major, huge plays last year that were game changers for us. I mean, against Pittsburgh, he basically won the game for us. And he really did come up with some massive plays last year. And I don't know, if Clay, we know he's had some injuries. I don't know how much of what's going on with Clay right now is injury related, and you'd hope that the bye week would help that, versus more scheming and him just not being part of this offense as much as we expected. I was a little bit, I thought, whereas everybody looked really energetic and really involved against Oakland, Clay still a little bit to me looked not quite like himself. Even on that Wallace touchdown, if you watch it, he had a nice block, but he actually, Wallace almost didn't get in because Clay didn't totally finish his block on that play.
Yeah, that shouldn't have been a touchdown. Both Clay and Sims were pretty awful on those blocking. I think I took a still where it's both of them kind of lost their man and it's 10 yards away from the goal line, so this shouldn't be a touchdown. And I think those were kind of one of those fortuitous hits where both defenders hit the player at the same time, so it kind of bounces off, and then it was more the kind of fourth contact in which we really saw Wallace's strength. Kind of, that was like the flash of strength to me. It's kind of sometimes you see those two players hit and it kind of rebalances a player. I think the two players you bring up, the other interesting thing about them both is both in a contract year, that kind of spices it up as well. I mean, I've been really impressed with Audric. I think he's playing like one of the top 2-3 defensive linemen in the league right now, defensive tackles anyway. There's, other than, if you kind of include 5 techs to 3 techs to 0 techs, it's like JJ Watt, Williams in Buffalo, and then Audric. I don't think maybe Jared McCoy you put in there somewhere, but
Aaron Donald's been fantastic too. I don't know if you've had a chance to see him, but
I wouldn't put him as high as those guys. I don't think he's been good, but I think those 3 players are Shaw's playing really well in Carolina as well. So for interior, I think those guys are playing above everyone else in the league. And I've been kind of like, I've been on a bit of a rampage of just, it's interesting how, before the year started, there were people telling me that Audric isn't a starter because he was not in base, even though he's in base now. And that if you're not in base, you're not a starter, and just utter nonsense like that. But I think he's now, maybe he's just behind OV in defensive snaps on the defensive line, which is remarkable as well for the role he plays. He's in base now for us with Mitchell over Starks. His first step has got quicker. His hand use is really good. He's just doing everything well. And I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't get a long-term deal, if he holds out, if he gets franchise tagged. To be honest, I talked to Andrew Aberson, and he was pretty confident that Audric would be getting signed. So we'll see how that happens and kind of how long term. And I just find it interesting, kind of Pouncey's given kind of 7.4 million a year, and no one kind of bats an eyelid. But then me saying Audric's worth 10 plus, and for some reason that sounds like lunacy. Whereas Audric's a top 5 player and Pouncey's maybe a top 10 in a much more devalued position for me.
Another nice advanced stat from Pro Football Focus, and I think there's been some folks online that have been. I'm not even going to get into the whole PFF grading thing because I think that's been totally just so overblown at this point that I don't want to talk about it anymore. But I think CK Parrott or some other folks mentioned that their advanced statistics, their signature stats, are actually like super underplayed. They're not used enough. They're really nice stats, but. Audric has there's a pressure percentage or a pass rushing productivity percentage for the defensive tackle. So basically the number of plays in which they're in where they're rushing that they result in getting a sack, a hit, or a hurry in rushing the passer. And he's actually 12th in the league right now amongst all the defensive tackles. He's got 6.3% of those plays result in a sack, a hurry, or a tackle. A sack, a hit, or a hurry, rather. So, anyhow, I mean, I think it's been fairly apparent to anybody who watches the film how good he's been, but it's nice to see that those numbers are backed up there. So, you know, I kind of, before the season, we talked about this team's relative strengths and weaknesses and what's going to win them and lose them games, and I kind of repeatedly mentioned the defensive line and how good they could be if they play up to their potential. I think we've seen that to be true pretty much so far. I mean, I think that Mitchell and Audric, Mitchell has been, I think, better than a lot of us expected. He's been really good. Audric has been, you know, just fantastic also. And then, you know, we'll see how Wake and company continue to do on the ends with edge pressure. But if the defensive line can continue to click and the linebackers, especially with Misi coming back, have a little more depth and maybe a little more energy, you know, I think the defense could continue to really go. I mean, I don't think too many people think the defense is what's held this team back. Against the Bills, the defense was fine. I mean, it was just a matter of getting some points on the board. And against Oakland, it's a little bit hard to judge because Oakland is kind of a bad team all around. But it'll be curious to see how effective the defensive line can continue to be. And, you know, in combination with some more linebacker depth and hopefully a more effective offense. To me, the biggest question, and I guess I'm segueing into what do we expect now with a quarter of the year done, what are we looking for and what are we expecting? I think the season's been really up and down, kind of how we talked about. We expected at the beginning of the year. We all said that we could see 6 to 10 wins. I think really 7 to 9 is a maybe a little tighter confidence interval that I think is pretty safe. I don't know. I'm just very curious to see if this offense can continue to execute consistently week in and week out, and not these games where they look fantastic against the Pats in the second half and amazing against a bad Oakland defense, but then can't do anything at all against Buffalo. And I'll be curious from my standpoint. I expect the defense to continue to play pretty well overall. I don't know if they'll be an elite unit, but I think the defense will hold its own. And I think this season's going to be made or broken by how effectively how effective the offense can execute as we go on.
I think something we've seen from this team that we didn't last year, most of our wins were pretty tight games and quite a lot of losses were as well. And so far we've kind of seen blowouts in both ways. And I think that generally comes from better offenses. I know that may sound kind of counterintuitive that you lose in blowouts with better offenses, but you see that kind of with teams like the Saints and Falcons when you're built on kind of explosive plays. It is more risk reward, and games in which we've had given away the ball more, we've won, and games in which we've taken away the ball more, we've lost, where in future years that would have been kind of the telling statistics. I think we're getting to a roster where there's more parity between the two units. That's also kind of showing within where the money's spent. It's closer to 50-50 between the offensive side of the ball and defensive, whereas before it was more 60% of the cap was on the defensive side. So I think we're going to see it more blowouts both ways. But I think that's a kind of a promising thing from a standpoint as where we can win a game either way, depending on the day. We can win it defensively or offensively. And that kind of makes you more versatile against opponents. You're not like you're not so dependent on being able to stop a team and outscore them to 24. Now we can score 32 points on team and outscore them. We can compete in shootouts to a certain degree if you kind of have that parity. So I don't know if Ian, you kind of any thoughts on? I mean, I'm not really going to. I think we can probably beat the Packers. That's as far as I'm looking ahead. They haven't really been spectacular. They're not really running the ball very well, and I think that kind of plays up into the Dolphins' hands. If you're facing a team that's not playing well, we can stop the run early with our defensive line. It gets harder as the game goes along to kind of constantly stop the running game with your defensive tackles or with your defensive line. That's asking a lot of that unit. But just looking ahead to the Packers, I think they match up relatively well, maybe opposed to the passing game. I think Jordy and Rogers can tear apart Grimes. I think Grimes' his feet have looked a tad slow to me already. Even on his pick, it wasn't he kind of recovered after stumbling, but it was more his physicality. Even his smallest, his physicality kind of got him that interception. So I think we're seeing his game kind of trend. He's starting to kind of make up for the deficiencies in age, but that's elite speed hasn't quite left. So I don't know if Ian, you want to kind of project a little into the season, or
I'll just be looking for. I mean, I guess there's a lot that you could look for. I mean, you guys mentioned a good amount, but can this team stay focused? And I think that really starts at coaching. What is the game plan in and out of every week? Like I said earlier, I think they found the winning formula. A little bit of ball control by running the ball effectively, setting up short yardage situations, keeping the defense off the field as much as possible. That's any team that's going to try to do that. I do think the defense has struggled getting off the field on third downs. That's a major concern. Last week we kind of saw a change in that, so hopefully that continues to trend that way. But really the energy, are they coming out at home games energized? Are they coming back if they fall down, a couple scores? I think that the Oakland game for me was a big FU to Joe Philbin. I know that sounds weird because, some people may say, well, why would they want to show their coach wrong, by playing angry and then playing well? Well, I mean, at the end of the day, everyone's got a job to do, and if they play poorly, they're going to be out of the league. So the only way they're going to stay in the league is by playing well. It just seemed like that was such a different. It seemed like it was a different level for this team. We've never seen a Joe Philbin-led team look that focused, execute that highly, come out quickly and play well besides the first defensive drive. So it was just so out of character that I think what was the reasoning for that out of character performance? And I mean, it was a great performance, but is that something that we can expect every week? I don't know, because I don't know the motivation behind it. I don't think Philbin is the leader of men, and so I think the rest of the season will really be determined by the off-season players that they acquired. Can they be locker room presence? And then also the coaching staff as well. What type of leadership do they have? And then also, are they putting together a solid game plan? Because this team is talented. This team can compete with almost every team in the league. They've got weaknesses, but every team has weaknesses. There's only probably 2 or 3 teams right now where I can definitively say Miami would certainly lose. And you're looking at Seattle, Denver, San Diego, and that's probably it. Everyone else they're going to compete with. Arizona would be a tough matchup as well. But for the most part, this is a talented team. Can they be focused? Can they translate that talent into wins? They're going to need coaching's help, and they're definitely going to have to execute consistently because the first 3 weeks, that was a major issue.
Well, I think we've been going for quite a while now, so if anyone has any final thoughts, or otherwise we can bugger off.
Yeah, just to close off, one last thing there that I just want to echo Ian's sentiments on is just that week in, week out energy and consistency and effort. And I do ultimately pin that on coaching. I think some people haven't been happy that I've done that, which is fine. But I'm a little bit fearful of depending on players in the NFL for motivating themselves, even though they're professionals. because it's just not enough. I think this week there was such a stark difference in how they played against energy-wise versus previous weeks. It's really hard to believe that some of that wasn't effort-related, and like Ian said, kind of sticking it up, yeah, kind of telling Philbin what was up. But I don't know if that's a sustainable strategy. I mean, I don't know if it's a sustainable strategy to be pissed off at your own coaches for the rest of the season. I think it works for a week. I just want to see how they're going to stay motivated. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all about execution, but what goes into execution, right? It's sound fundamentals and effort, and some luck. Obviously, always some luck. But I think fundamentals haven't changed that much for any player. I think what changed was the effort. So let's see if they can keep up that effort and give us something fun to watch.
Well, I have a theory on why we kind of saw a fast start, which I think you're like Pablo as well. I think they were tired and the starters didn't want to play a full game.
They were jet lag. I think they were jet lagged.
Yeah, so they're like, we'll blow them out of the water in the first half and we can go to sleep. So that's my theory. You should see how fast Matt Moore wanted to get into the locker room at half time. He must have been dying for a sleep. So yeah, I think they were exhausted. So that's what you got to do. Just come to London every week, get really tired, and you win by half time. Well, I guess,
all right, fellas.
Thanks to everyone who watched, listened, and I guess we will have another one of these after next week before the Packers game, and we'll get to see them maybe face. Are they playing Teddy or not? Have we heard? Or Vikings still playing 9 games?
Game time decision.
So they're using every second advantage whilst Vegas sweats on a line.
Yep.
So that'll be interesting to watch today, kind of whether we see the same Packers as last weekend or the first 3 weeks. So I recommend everyone watch that. And then, has anyone else got any final farewells or thoughts?
No, just stay tuned. We'll be bringing some more. I know we've been a little deficient with content on the site lately, but we've got some stuff finally coming along here.
Okay, well, goodbye everyone, and pay Aldrich.